For fans of horror and video games, the Silent Hill name has long been synonymous with rich atmosphere, memorable characters, and disturbing otherworldly hellscapes. The series that started with a popular Resident Evil-inspired adventure on the PlayStation 1 had seen several successful sequels by the end of the PlayStation 2 era, with the final numbered entry, Silent Hill 4: The Room, releasing in 2004. But the landscape for horror games had begun to change. Inundated with a plethora of games crafted in the same horror survival mold, the industry began tilting towards a more action-oriented approach to the genre, trading slow-paced inventory management and creeping tension for guts, gore, and jump scares, a paradigm shift that would be heralded by landmark titles like Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space. But where would that leave a series like Silent Hill, which had been built on slow-burning dread and tension? As the next generation of consoles loomed, Konami sought to bring their flagship horror series to the Xbox 360 and PS3. However, from the very beginning of development, things would be different for this game than any in the series before it. This is a look inside the development of the first main Western-developed game in the Silent Hill series, from the developers who made it. Silent Hill Homecoming wasn't the first Western-made Silent Hill game. That honor goes to Silent Hill Origins from developer Climax Games, originally released for PSP before later being ported to the PlayStation 2. As things go in the game industry, Silent Hill Origins had its own troubled development, attested to by an anonymous development team member that, for the purposes of this documentary, we will simply refer to as A. The US office of Climax had been doing Origins, like they were in charge of it, after the Silent Hill experience on PSP. So they were making a game at the direction of the Konami producer that was more comedy. It was less serious, but it had the origins of the town. So it had stuff like who's Pyramid Head, where'd he come from. So then that studio wasn't doing very well. So Climax UK, who had just finished Ghost Rider for the PSP, thought that they could use that engine to make a Silent Hill game. And they had people like Sam Barlow who did care a lot about Silent Hill. So they saw what the US office was doing and were like, this is not great. So the president of Climax UK basically made a pledge that we can make this game more true to the series in the time that's left for development. This is going to be a disaster, but we can fix it. So the US office shut down and the UK office got Origins and quickly rewrote it to what it is. The protagonist was the same, the trucker thing was the same, and they had already made the CG cutscenes, so the stuff in the game that's full motion CG, that's from the original pitch. But everything else they rewrote. After the release of Silent Hill 4, Konami began actively seeking a new development team for a fifth entry in the franchise. At the time, Double Helix, then known as The Collective, put forward a pitch that revolved around a vertical slice that focused on atmosphere, storytelling, and controversially enough, action. From A. Quote, Double Helix, who were known as The Collective at the time, got chosen as the developer because they had just done the Buffy game. So that was the engine they made Homecoming on. So they did a demo and they got the gig. But the Japanese side had talked about a game after The Room that wasn't connected to this. I know that comes up in interviews and people get confused.
We had an opportunity to pitch a Silent Hill game to Konami. I was at The Collective and I was pretty much the first original person on the project, along with a few others, John Manley being one of them. And we came up with a brief and a PowerPoint deck that sort of spelled out a potential vision for what we would do with the Silent Hill franchise. And from there, we got positive feedback on our pitch, and we signed the project and started pre-production.
It was super exciting because it was next gen. Before all the characters and whatnot only had like limited joints, like you'd have your 3 fingers and your 1 finger for your characters in game, but this one actually you could have full joint, full articulation, and so we were super excited because that at the time had never been done. And then also Silent Hill was a huge profile title, and so we were excited to work with the guys at Konami on that.
Yeah, we had a point of contact producer, and for the life of me, I can't remember his name right now. And we would provide feedback and, not feedback, we would provide materials and builds and things like that through them. We would get feedback and it was, it was pretty much a publisher developer relationship, very standard. We had milestones that we'd sign up for, a production schedule, we'd get validated, and then we would start delivering on those milestones.
Before continuing, I'd like to address something of a conspiracy theory that has persisted about Homecoming's development in the years since release, that it was developed, even intended, to be the first in a trilogy of games. This supposed trilogy would have brought back old fan favorite characters and would have seen Josh and Alessa, the primary antagonist of the first Silent Hill game, battling for control of Silent Hill. The problem is, this was never true. As rumors on the internet go, this yarn has been exaggerated over time. The truth here is much more pedestrian and common in the game industry than one might think. The idea for a trilogy originated with a Konami producer who was taken off the project later, and it was only ever that, an idea. This supposed trilogy never made it to a planning phase. It was never seriously considered by Konami higher-ups or Double Helix leadership. It only ever existed in a tentative brief for the future of the series after Homecoming's release. Quote, anytime you write a story treatment in Hollywood, you kinda have, here's the story we're telling and here's the possibilities for expanding it, here's what the sequels might be, and you write those up in brief. So that existed, and it was, Heather or Henry comes back to put an end to Silent Hill, and in the third game they join and they bring Alex back, and then you have your super team of Alex, Elle, Heather, and Henry, and they're gonna put a stop to Silent Hill once and for all. And then Josh, who'd be this trilogy's Alessa, and Alessa would square off and decide who controls the town. So it was like this weird East versus West thing, like old Silent Hill versus new Silent Hill. These high-level briefs existed. The producers shared the idea with members of the team. Like, I have these really great ideas for a sequel, here's what we're gonna do. But this game was always a self-contained game, because it would have been the first in a trilogy. And if you're writing the first in a trilogy, you write it like a standalone thing, because it might be the only thing that gets made, and you don't want a weird loose end. End quote. The final nail in the coffin for any rumor that Homecoming was ever seriously intended to be a trilogy, outside of the tentative plans of a single Konami producer who departed the project before it was finished, should be the word of the game's writers, who attest that they never saw anything indicating such a plan.
I do not remember that at all. That, I mean, if there was any conversation that Josh was going to go fight Alessa, although that would be a pretty interesting story, we never had anything approached. We never approached anything potentially where there was a continuation of these characters or story. There was no sort of postscript or postmortem that conversation ever happened. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I mean, look, years of developing a game, if someone, if Mac, the level designer, was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if like Josh fought Alessa, and that ends up somewhere in an email, suddenly it becomes like, oh, that was an initial idea. So many ideas got kicked around in 2 years. Doesn't mean that anything was potentially going to be anything. It just meant that was a conversation people had.
I think that when we were writing it, there was never talk of what the next game was going to be, which is kind of rare, because usually when you write anything, everybody talks about, well, what's the next thing going to be? But I'm pretty sure when we were doing it, everyone was really focused on what's this game going to be, because it was the first sort of American-made in the series. It was incorporating a lot of things from the movie, and it was sort of like a, almost in some ways a reboot, relaunch, sequel. And I think everyone was so focused on what the game was going to be. I don't remember anyone ever talking about what the next game was going to be.
After a successful pitch to Konami, the collective began working on a vertical slice. In the game industry, a vertical slice refers to a small section of polished gameplay intended to give an idea for how a game would look and play overall.
So we didn't do the vertical slice until we got the project signed. So yeah, we did a forest and a house for our first vertical slice to try to get an idea of what that might feel like as play mechanics.
The vertical slice itself saw Alex, who would go on to be the main character of Homecoming, interacting with a hunter. Early concept art names this hunter Clint Harris, though he and his gameplay sequence would be entirely cut from the finished game.
When Double Helix initially pitched the idea to Konami, they had created this idea that Silent Hill was here and they created this new environment of Shepherd's Glen, and then there was a pact with Silent Hill to keep Shepherd's Glen safe, and now the pact was crumbling, and now they had to go back to Silent Hill. That was an idea that had already been pitched. But what came along with that pitch, because now I'm remembering, they created another level that I don't think anybody's seen. It doesn't exist in the game, and it was a coal mine. It was basically the hunter and a cabin. It was this whole thing. It was like so they basically pitched the idea of Shepherd's Glen, and they had this little demo they had made, and it had at the time the Shepherd character going through like a coal mine or a well. He ended up in a cabin with a hunter, and they fought some feral wolves. And it was like a level, and ultimately that whole level, that whole world, that whole scene going up to this coal mine and all that stuff or whatever it was, all got scrapped. But they had this initial story idea and they had that level. And we had read the couple pages of the story premise of Shepherd's Glen in the pact with the order. And then we had seen that feral wolves kind of cabin fight level. Those are the two things that they used to pitch to get the gig.
The vertical slice was not necessarily what Konami had in mind, and apparently relied too much on action, something that the collective would soon remedy. From A. Quote, "It was more Resident Evil 4 than what we got. It was more the game people were afraid of getting, pretty action-heavy. Like the story was, it still had the hospital from the beginning, that's always been there, and then I want to say the Shepherd's Glen stuff was more streamlined, like you got to Curtis pretty quick. It was really early and very action-packed. And Konami had kind of said, no, this isn't Silent Hill, this is more Resident Evil. Don't forget we're making a Silent Hill game." And to Double Helix's credit, they weren't necessarily saying, hey, Silent Hill should be more like Resident Evil. The whole point was that they were trying to feel it out and hear from Konami, like, hey, where do you want us to be? Where do you want us to land? How modern do you want it? How traditional do you want it? Here's the thing you can play, let us know where you want it. It's not like they were trying to change Silent Hill. End quote.
At the time when this game was being developed, Res Evil 4 was like hot. And Res Evil 4 had totally changed the gameplay from the previous Resident Evil games, which were much more slowly paced. And Resident Evil 4 was now over the shoulder, almost like a third person, but over the shoulder. And there's a lot of combat and a lot of shooting, and it was really cool. And so now Silent Hill was tasked, for better or for worse, depending on who you ask, to kind of emulate that look and style.
Now, the first vertical slice that we did, or the first playable, was not received as well as we would have liked. We had it was a pretty rough early take. We had a good idea of what we wanted to accomplish. It wasn't quite hitting on the experiential level that we wanted. But it did have some early character designs and things that did survive, like Siam was the creature in the basement that we ended up featuring. But the mechanics themselves, the whole thing, the combat hadn't matured. The traversal was very bare bones, and we ended up doing another proof of concept, as I recall, after the first one.
Once the pitch and vertical slice were accepted by Konami, Double Helix brought in the writing team of Patrick Duty and Chris Valenziano, who brought a more cinematic touch to the team's vision.
And I had been a longtime fan of Silent Hill. I'd played all the games, and as mentioned by Chris, or whether you use that point or not, but I had gone to film school at University of Miami and had made a friend there named Marwan Abdurazak, who subsequently became and still is a producer in the video game space. And at some point, the studio he was working for, Double Helix at the time, had gotten the bid to do Silent Hill, the first American produced Silent Hill on the next gen system, which would have been Xbox 360 at the time. And so he knew I was a big horror film fan. He knew that Chris and I were writing partners. They had been friends as well. He knew we liked genre stuff. And so he basically offered us a chance to go in and pitch ourselves as the writers on the game. And so that was what got us into the room at Double Helix. And we met with Brian Horton and John Manley, who were leads on the game at the time. And they had given us, a sort of an outline, and then we sort of talked about it from there.
So when Konami was looking for writers for this game, Marwan approached Patrick and I and said, hey, would you guys like to be interested in this? And he may have known that Patrick was a huge fan of the game series. And we went through a process where we submitted writing samples, where we explained what our ideas would be, how we could add to the plot that they had already come up with, and we got the job, and so we started working on it from there.
Anyways, we met with Konami, and the meeting was not necessarily about writing the game or what we thought about the game. We didn't know too much about what Silent Hill at the time, Silent Hill 5, Flesh and Blood, little tidbit of information was called. We didn't know much about what the game was, but they were like, just come in and meet with Konami. And they said, and make sure you're kind of versed up on the lore of Silent Hill. It'd been a while since I'd played 4. So the weekend before, I went and got a PlayStation 2 because I already had an Xbox. I got all the games, and I played all 4 games again in the course of 4 days from beginning to end. And refresh myself with everything. So when we went into that meeting with Konami, they kind of tried to, knock down what we knew about the lore. And at that point, it was like going into a bar trivia. Like we were unshakable. You couldn't rattle us. Like we knew everything about Silent Hill because it was so fresh in our heads. Everything from like Toluca Lake, Seal of Metatron, any of the weird, anything that was small, big, large. So that was sort of how we ended up getting the gig. They offered us a job after that meeting, which, by the way, I don't know if Chris remembers, it was like 3 hours with that guy from Konami.
So we went in, we had this meeting with Konami, we got hired as writers on the project, and they had already fleshed out an outline for the plot of the game. And they had characters they had come up with, they had moments in the story, they had locations in the story, and then overall general outline. And what they wanted us to do was to come in and help flesh that out. And having been screenwriters, we were going to tackle the in-game cinematics, but we were also going to write puzzles, we were going to write journal entries, we were going to write labels on sides of buildings, and basically help them create this entire world of Shepherd's Glen. And so we went to work on that, and it was in phases. And I remember that one of the first phases was working out the story, the storyline, the order of events throughout history that led to this, and getting all that into place, getting the entire story there so that everything tracked correctly. And then the next phase was we started writing the in-game cinematics, and that was the most similar to what we had done before. Those were the actual cut scenes from the game. And we wrote those, and then we got to see those scenes come to life when they actually cast them and when they did the animation. And then one of the last things we worked on was all of the puzzles, the journals, the details, clues, all sorts of little things that sometimes helped with gameplay, sometimes were just little Easter eggs that you would find as you were working through the game and you were playing the game. You would find different things, and you'd find a newspaper article, and that would have something to do with Shepherd's Glen. And that was really cool because we really got to flesh out that whole world and create this whole mythology and a whole history to a new town that hadn't been in the previous games.
With the vertical slice finished, writers found and a direction decided on, Homecoming, then known as Silent Hill 5 Flesh and Blood, began its long road to completion. But from the beginning, things were prone to change and adaptation.
Where's my squad? Are they here? Did they make it? Hey, talk to me. Say something. Oh, God. Oh, God!
Certain aspects of Homecoming were cemented early in development. Alex was always meant to be a soldier, something alluded to in the game's opening moments, where players can hear the sounds of explosions on a battlefield. But a different, more radical introduction was planned and cut early on, one that may have included more action-packed combat and a hellish Silent Hill-inspired modern battlefield.
There was actually a different introduction originally to the game.
When we came on board, initially there was going to be an actual playable war level that was going to be, as the game starts now, it starts in black and you hear the sounds of war, and then you wake up in the hospital. the hospital has a series of short vignettes, and then it becomes a playable level. In essence, the hospital level is a mix of a playable level and a tutorial. You're learning about a lot of story, and you're also learning how to play the gameplay, because it was very different from previous Silent Hill games. The way that the gameplay was manipulated was much more of a 3D environment versus other ones that had kind of forced hands of angles and stuff like that. So anyways, back to the original question, which was there another way to start the game? There was. There was going to be a war level. It was going to be Alex in a war. Little side note, Alex Shepard's name when we came on board was Matthew Shepard. And we said, you cannot have a character called Matthew Shepard, because it had only been a few years since the terrible incident that occurred to the young man named Matthew Shepard and a hate crime. And we said, that's weird. You can't really call that. And they were like, oh, that's a good point. They just hadn't thought about it, and they fixed it. So it was Matthew Shepard at the time, but Alex Shepard had was going through the war level, and they were going to build all this combat. They were going to build all this combat. And at some point, I remember it was either Marwan or Brian saying to me, we're not a game company that makes combat. Like, all these other games are making combat. If we try to do a combat level and it's not up to the level of what at that time of Call of Duty, which was the #1 combat game when we were working on this, they said, if we don't match that, we're just going to look really sad. So they scrapped the combat level, kept it just the combat sound effects, kept the combat sound effects under black, and then became the hospital level.
Quote, there was like, hey, here's a scene from Iraq. Like, they looked at news footage and they drew it, and they took that same image and then put a fog world filter on it and then an otherworld filter on it. So it was like, what would Alex's otherworld look like? Because he had seen this in the real world. It was that comparison, and that would have been really cool to see. But it would have been wasting it on this weird fake out instead of showing us this really interesting premise. End quote. The fake out alluded to in the previous quote, by the way, having to do with the fact that Alex was never actually a soldier, a late game twist.
I think a very early iteration of that, involved the battlefield. It ended up being in the Alchemilla Hospital because there's like a scene where he's being transferred by his father, though you don't know it's his father, on a gurney kind of thing, a rolling gurney. Yeah, so originally I think that whole scene in the Alchemilla Hospital where it starts with the being rolled through the hospital was actually initially thought of as on a battlefield, and it transitions to the hospital. But they just cut out the military stuff, which doesn't make sense because the whole sort of gotcha was about, like, he thinks he's in the military, but it turns out he's not.
That did not get a lot of traction. I don't even remember there was no assets developed around that. So I don't remember that. I mean, when you said it, I was like, oh my gosh, do we do that? I don't recall that at all. That might have been in an early deck because we were coming off the idea of him being a soldier, and believing himself to be a soldier. So we wanted to have some kind of nod to that nightmare, that war-torn nightmare. But I think that we never even did a playable against that. I think it might have just been an ideation.
Whether a result of Konami's tepid reaction to more action-packed vertical slices, or internal issues with creating such a grand opening sequence, the Battlefield opening of Homecoming was likely best left on the cutting room floor. However, not every controversial idea during the game's development would receive the same treatment. One of the most unique aspects of Silent Hill as a series has always been the symbolism of the enemies. The monsters that roam Silent Hill are often directly tied to the psyche or trauma of the main cast of characters, and so change accordingly from game to game. The most iconic Silent Hill monster, Pyramid Head, debuted in Silent 2 as a manifestation of guilt and judgment for the main character, James Sunderland. With his imposing stature, large knife, and instantly recognizable helmet, Pyramid Head was an instant horror icon and would be prominently featured in the 2005 Silent Hill adaptation, despite lacking any symbolic ties to the film's story or characters. Even though he only appeared in a few pieces of Silent Hill media, Pyramid Head had become a de facto series mascot, and so it was decided that he would appear once again in Homecoming. I can't say with certainty who this decision fell to. I've heard it was insisted by the Konami producer who was removed from the project. But whatever the truth is, it was always going to be controversial for fans, and maybe surprisingly, for the developers themselves.
when the movie was actually hugely influential on a lot of the game. The nurse design of the game came right out of what the nurse's design was in the film. Pyramid Head being so seminal in the series at this point and being such a major part of the film, it was just always going to be that Pyramid Head was going to make an appearance in the game. It was not something we pushed for, and we just figured out where and when Pyramid Head would appear, and it only made sense to tie it to Adam's kind of journey going over into Silent Hill to stop everything, that Pyramid Head, for better or for worse, was like, you know, kind of there to stop him as his own kind of, you know, whatever. The shepherds are complicit in part of this horror that goes on in Shepherd's Glen. So Adam trying to stop them, his past just ultimately catches up with them.
It's interesting because there was mixed feelings. I'd say about half the team was really excited to bring Pyramid Head in. Half of the team did not like it because they thought it shouldn't be in this game.
Quote, I don't want to blame Konami for this. I really think it was a producer trying to leverage Pyramid Head's popularity. He was in the movie, and I understand why he was in the movie. I think it was trying to make Pyramid Head the mascot because he had kind of become the mascot. Take yourself back to 2005. If you saw Pyramid Head, you'd be excited, but you knew he wasn't going to be in the game. Like, he was the brand mascot, he was in the kart racer, but that didn't mean he was in every game. I really think the producer was trying to leverage that because in the pitch for Homecoming, it was like, the difference in our game is we've got Pyramid Head. Like, hey, he's back. End quote.
You know, I think a lot of that was we knew that he was extremely popular character within the franchise. We wanted to take, do our take on it. I mean, it's not exactly the film version, but there's definitely a heavy inspiration on that from the film. The big difference for us on that was how we personalized it. Was the sword was very much built off of the knife that was Alex's, right, or his father's. So there was a personal connection, and I think that's the one thing we wanted to do, was make sure that whatever manifestations of these creatures were, they were speaking psychologically to Alex and his mental state.
Quote, after playing the game, we had conversations like, get Pyramid Head out of the game. He shouldn't be there. He looks different. He looks like the movie Pyramid Head. He doesn't look like the game Pyramid Head. Some would say that his knife looked like a military knife, like, hey, that's the right track, good job building this monster after the characters, but it shouldn't be Pyramid Head. End quote.
I believe our designers figured out a way to kind of make it make sense, but some people didn't agree with the way it was, and they just kind of thought that shouldn't be in the game. And so to this day, there's mixed, feelings on that. I think we did a good job on making him look and feel like Pyramid Head. I myself probably would have kept him out.
Between the pitch, vertical slice, and other aspects of development, Silent Hill 5's development didn't have the smoothest start, compounded by issues with a producer from Konami who departed the project close to the beginning.
I mean, it was pretty rocky for the first I would say I don't know, half the show was pretty rocky, and then it took a lot to finally get stuff working, and there was just a lot of I remember there's just been a lot of bugs that I think it was a fairly new team also.
Despite fans' misgivings about the inclusion of Pyramid Head, many of the team at Double Helix were Silent Hill fans themselves, and did their best to stay true to the spirit of the series.
What I do remember, I remember going over to Patrick's apartment, and Patrick had he had a video game system, and he was playing this game called Silent Hill, and he would turn all the lights off, and he would turn the surround sound on, and he would play this game, and I'd sit there and watch him play for a certain amount of time before I'd be like, hey, this is just freaking me out. I can't do this anymore. And he'd play until the wee hours of the morning, and then he couldn't sleep because he would terrify himself. But I remember watching this game, and it was so unique because you were seeing this game that refreshed and refreshed and refreshed, and you were walking through this fog, and you just never knew what was going to come at you next. You could hear little things, you could see glimpses of things, but there was this fog that was that was stopping you from seeing everything. And I'd never seen a game like that before. And it was something that was so incredibly creepy, and obviously something that became a big hallmark for the series itself.
I bought that game, the Silent Hill game. I bought that out of a trunk of a guy's car outside of the mall. Do you remember that? Because the game had come out and you couldn't find it anywhere. And then some guy was like, yeah, I got Silent Hill. And he opened up the trunk of his car. He had like all these games. So I bought for $20, whatever, the first Silent Hill game out of the trunk of the car. And I did play a lot. And not only was, I mean, yes, that part was interesting. The fact the fog kind of endless, but also like just story-wise and visually, it kind of was very striking. You kind of never seen anything that was sort of that sort of surreal. At least not, I had not been experiencing that in the video game space. In film space I had, but it was so cinematic. So we'd been longtime fans. So it was pretty exciting to get asked to work on the new version, on 5 at the time.
I played Silent Hill 2 over, like, a few times over and over again, and really got, into that headspace. I didn't want to see the movie because I didn't want to get influenced by the movie to make it just sort of like, because I mean, once you hear something and then you kind of have it in your head, you tend to like try to make it sound like that. And I kind of wanted to come from a more original approach.
The two games that, well, the original Silent Hill is amazing. We loved that game, but it was really Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3 that we felt had the most, from art team perspective, were our favorites, right? And had the ingredients that we wanted to make sure we were spiritual successors from.
The one thing we did do is we had the original sound designer come in and do all the music for it, and that played a huge part. Like, without his sound, I don't even think Silent Hill would be half the game it is,
and getting Akira to do the soundtrack was critical, and we fought hard to like get Akira on there because we felt that was the heart and soul of that franchise, as far as I'm concerned. Like the pulse of it comes from Akira's music, and I'm so thankful that he joined the project, and we had a pretty good working relationship.
In a fitting tradition for Silent Hill, which had previously taken direct influence from horror movies and franchises like Hellraiser, Jacob's Ladder, and Twin Peaks, Homecoming's writers would also look to some of their own horror favorites for influence.
He wrote those lines for the character, which is basically kind of like a Silent Hill version of Lillian, right? It's supposed to kind of be potentially her. You have a kind face, all that. There's a line there that says you have a kind face, which we lifted right out of Exorcist 3. The old lady says it's a George C. Scott in the old folks home. So that was a puzzle where like there's a puzzle, and then we kind of figure out like what was the path that got you the key that she handed you through the hole. But they knew they wanted that puzzle, and we just had to like give them the dialogue that could lead you to that answer.
With the stumbling blocks of pre-production cleared, a writing team contracted, and a narrative structure settled upon, development for Silent Hill 5 Flesh and Blood kicked into high gear. The story of Silent Hill 5 revolves around Alex Shepard, a young soldier who returns home from war to find his small town of Shepherd's Glen nearly abandoned and his brother and father missing. He sets out to find them, along the way uncovering his own mysterious past and a conspiracy by the 4 founding families of the town, the Shepherds, the Bartletts, the Finches, and the Holloways, that keeps a supernatural evil from consuming the town in exchange for a blood sacrifice. Each family must sacrifice their firstborn child each generation to preserve the balance of power. As a story about lineage and family, a lot of work would go into fleshing out Homecoming's characters and tying them together through various subplots. Unfortunately, during development, much of it would be cut, though some still survived in various forms.
It was over the course of over a year. It was over the course of over a year that we wrote an enormous amount of material for this game. Some of it never got used. Some of it was used in online blogs and behind the scenes pieces. But there was a huge amount of writing that was required in order to bring the world of Shepherd's Glen to life. Those main plot points were in there, and I think when we came in, we were sort of hired to point out a lot of the holes in the plot, because some of the things that were in there were cool ideas that all conflict with each other. There was Judge Holloway had one storyline, Elle had a storyline. Sometimes they would have these really, really cool ideas. A lot of the time those things are written by committee or they're written because of a level they want to create. And so they had a lot of things that were really, really neat, but some of them didn't mesh together. And so one of the things we were brought in to do was to point those things out and to find solutions and say, hey, we like this idea with Judge Holloway. We like this thing with Elle. We like Wheeler being here. Okay, how do we make this make sense? And then when we decide for budget reasons or gameplay reasons or whatever, we have to make this huge change, how do you keep track of it? So a lot of our job was keeping track of the story and keeping track of the characters to make sure that when you went through the game, that the story still made sense.
I was able to look at assets and documents made during development that details each character, their backgrounds, motivations, and even inspirations for their physical appearances. For example, the document states that Alex's Hollywood actor archetype is based on Josh Hartnett, Wentworth Miller, and Jake Gyllenhaal. Other archetypes, such as those displayed for Deputy Wheeler, come from actors like Forrest Whitaker and Charles Dutton, which I think effectively come through in the character as the development team made them. These background documents are extensive, giving pages and pages of lore and story to characters, sometimes who only had a few minutes on screen. Some of the more interesting characterizations that unfortunately never made it into the game include Judge Holloway's history as an ambitious and power-hungry lawyer. Another interesting tidbit revealed in these character documents is that Elle is meant to be Silent Hill 2's Laura, who at some point had run away to Silent Hill before returning to Shepherd's Glen. It's a pity that some of these elements didn't make it into the final game, because they could have given the game and the characters a much-needed fleshing out. The Silent Hill film, which released in 2006, had a profound impact on the game's visual style, though not necessarily for reasons some might speculate. Instead of Konami trying to emulate the film for brand cohesion, the stylistic similarities were more of a result of trying to craft a new Silent Hill game on then-modern hardware that would be as cinematic as possible. Quote, internally, this was never seen as the movie game. In some circles, it has a reputation of they pulled the Order and the Nurses and Pyramid Head from the movie. I think that was just a use what makes sense from the movie because that's what mainstream people might recognize, less than hey, make this line up exactly with the movie. End quote.
They were in the process of making the movie. So this was, even though it was not based off of the movie, there would be a lot of tie-ins, a lot of influence from that.
I think that the film impacted the game more in terms of design and look. The look of the Order, the
yes, very much
fog, the raining ash. I think a lot of those things are what influenced the game because the movie did have such a cool look. So I think design-wise, look-wise, wanting it to feel more cinematic, I think was a big thing in the game. And I think a lot of that came from the movie. But in terms of the story and the dialogue and all of that, I think that we drew much more from the previous games and trying to stay within the tone of Silent Hill.
One of the things we all had to do is we all had to watch the movie. I guess they didn't force you; they highly recommended it. I don't know. It's like there's parts of it that intrigued you, and parts of it that repulse you. And that's kind of what Silent Hill wants. Like it wants both of those.
The influence of the film on Homecoming appears to vary depending on the discipline you ask. While animators had to watch the movie, other team members like Eric Ocampo attest to not seeing the movie, even choosing not to see it as a way to stay free from influence. Some of the most technically impressive moments Homecoming delivered, the Otherworld transitions, were cribbed directly from the style of the film, and took a lot of hard work to pull off in real time on console hardware.
One of the other things I remember that was pulled from the movie or inspired from the movie was this idea that you were going to see, I believe for the first time, the world transition from the Silent Hill foggy world to the nightmare world, and watching the paint peel off of the walls, and the fact that they were now able to do that in the game, as opposed to just having it fade to black, fade back up, and see the nightmare world, that you're going to get to see that transition while you moved around. And I remember when we first saw it, we were like, wow, that is really cool.
I think the idea, as the lead artist, I felt like it was our opportunity to try to deliver on what I felt was a very much the movie inspired by the games, but yet at the highest fidelity that we hadn't seen yet. So there were certain touchstones out of the movie that we thought were absolutely incredible, like the peeling walls was one of those things that we just said that would just be incredible to see in real time. Can we transition worlds using similar technology, similar aesthetic? So yeah, I really loved the aesthetic of the movie. I did not love the movie as a story, but I thought there were some things in it that were beautifully art directed. So at the time, the movie was, as we were in the middle of development when the movie came out, so it wasn't like the movie was first and then we started it. We started before the movie. Um, but yeah, the idea was they had done some things that felt visually pushed further than anything we had seen in the games thus far. So that was a cool benchmark for us to try to achieve. Can we get something that looks as good as this film does, especially from the transitions? We did techniques that at the time I didn't know were possible. And a lot of it was using a lot of pre-baked film ideas, like you would simulate the paint, right, on the walls, but we would bake it down into textures that would have normal maps so that the light would hit it and it actually looked physical, even though it wasn't. And we'd augment that with particles. The ground was actually physical mesh transforming. So we had to create this really, at the time, very cutting edge vertex animation system that would animate these, thousands of vertices in a very complex simulated way. So there was a lot of R&D that went into those transitions, and I still look at those going, oh, those are pretty cool.
Two specific creatures were influenced by the film: the Pyramid Head and the nurses.
We tried to do unique things that players wouldn't expect, with the exception of Pyramid Head. Obviously, Pyramid Head was a previous character, and we had to make him feel and look like Pyramid Head, but just an extra. So that we did look at not only the previous Silent Hill game, but also the movie, to kind of look for ways to bring that character into the game.
The one I remember is just the first magazine EGM that I did all the renders for. I think I still have the magazine, in my drawer. I did the renders for all of that using the game engine, and posed out those characters and did those key art pieces, key renders. And a lot of that stuff, I still see that nurse image being used all over the place. Like, people just grab that all the time. We did not want to just repeat what was done in the games, and the film was in our mind at the time a visual sort of spiritual successor to what was in the games, and just gave us a visual bar that was at the time cutting edge technology of creating these very hyper realistic characters in ZBrush and getting a lot more surface detail and advanced skin shaders and things like that would bring that film-like quality, to a video game.
For many, the world of Silent Hill just wouldn't be the same without the odd, grotesque monsters that inhabit the foggy streets. It would be no small feat for Double Helix to live up to Team Silent's work, though by many fan accounts, Homecoming did an admirable job.
The one thing I think we did nail is the bosses. Like, to this day, I think Silent Hill 5 probably has some of the best bosses in any Silent Hill game. I was very fortunate. I was a senior animator at the time, and I got to work on the Blood Boss, which was one of the favorites of not just any boss in the game, but any boss in the entire Silent Hill series. So that was very lucky for me, I guess. I really enjoyed working on that particular character. As animators, like, you love this stuff because it's weird type of creatures that you never really get to animate those type of things, because you're trying to think of designs that just don't work. Like the concept artists and the models would constantly be piecing together, things on purpose that normally just wouldn't go with each other. And then as an animator, you have to figure out, how do you make this move? And then you have to figure out not only how do you make a move, but how do I make a move that's going to scare or shock the player? And that is a very tricky thing, because what scares and shocks one person may not scare and shock another person.
Besides Pyramid Head, I think every one of the creatures, I was really proud of what the team came up with. Kenzie Lamar was lead character artist, and Bayard was one of our character artists and designers. Bay, his personal style is absolutely incredible, and some of the most unique creatures came from his designs. But what I loved how each of the boss characters sort of reflected the pain of each of the children that were sacrificed, and becoming those manifestations of that pain and what they were into, whether it's Scarlet and the doll, or Sepulchre or Amnion. All those characters were very much built off of the traumas and psychology of the trauma of the people that were sacrificed. And of course, Siam being manifestation, the pain of his family, his own family, Alex's family. But Asphyxia, I mean, all the characters, to me, what I liked about them is they wove in the story of how they were sacrificed directly into the character design.
But we were all the animators were constantly kind of, looking at each other's works, kind of critiquing it. John Burns was the lead animator during that time, and it'd be constantly giving feedback as well. But he kind of, which I like a lot, he kind of let the senior animators and even the other animators just kind of run with it, and he would kind of step in if things just weren't working. But in doing so, I think it gave quite a lot of flavor, because you'd get a lot of different motion, a lot of different ideas that you normally would not. Like the animator that did Siam, he did an amazing job on that.
I would make additions to some of the creatures. I mean, so they did like the first pass kind of thing, and then so I would take their stuff, and then we needed more of it, so I would just kind of listen to their stuff and then design stuff that works with that, sort of like creature sweeteners, and also like additions, so it's like they gave me 6 creature attack vocals, and then needed 12, so then I would create 6 more that sounded very much in the same type of realm as the original stuff, so that way it all sounds like one creature. Yeah, actually there was this one scene where you're fighting this creature, like spider-looking thing made out of metal. I think the legs were metal, and she had a pregnant belly. Yeah, the scene where it's after the boss fight, so the win. So when you win, it would play this cutscene, and then yeah, I loved what I did with the legs, because she was kind of pulsating like this, and so I took a lot of squeak stuff that I actually was stuff that I recorded for music, or to make industrial music. And then and so I took some of those recordings that made of metal. So I was doing some 9 Inch Nails stuff at the time. I used that stuff, and it worked really well. And once I hit the reverb, it just sounded just huge. And yeah, and it was really fun. I think he actually cuts open her stomach or something like that, and she's puking up blood or it's just something really bizarre. And then that was really fun to cut that stuff. It was just disgusting, most weirdest thing that you've ever seen.
We had 2 types of things. We had keyframe animation, which was the blood boss, and a lot of the monsters were keyframed. But then you had motion capture, which was more of the human type of characters we've motion captured. So a lot of Alex's moves were, although we ended up having to redo his moves just because it wasn't responsive enough, and so we had to actually hand key a lot of those moves. a lot were mocap, but then the nurses were another one of the things that were mocap, and they hired an actor to actually act that motion out. And she did an amazing job of, getting that nurse type of feeling. And then I believe another monster that was motion captured was Siam, the one with like the beast and the girl like combined. I believe they tied like two people kind of together, and they were in the motion capture, acting it out. But they would have to done some. I wasn't on the set there because I was on the creature side, but they would have to done some crazy stuff in the studio for that, because obviously you basically have two parts, and the way I believe they had like these two sticks that their character would be holding, using for like the front two arms, and they like some motion capture all that out. The other one was that water creature, I forget the name, but they motion captured that as well.
Once enemies were decided upon and went into the production pipeline, it came down to the game's writers to work with the game designers and artists to help them fit into Homecoming's lore, keeping the tradition of Silent Hill's monster symbolism.
We had to go through for all the creatures, and we had to write up what they were, what their strengths were, kind of do like a stat thing for them, and then what they meant, what their metaphor was. And it was interesting because a lot of them, like, they were just designed creatures. They just looked cool. This one was, we're going to have some creature that looks like a giant spider or whatever. But then we would have to retcon why it looked like that. We'd be like, oh, it's a spider because it represents all the thoughts that Alex's mother has when she does this. So we would have to try to give them all metaphor importance and why they looked that way, which was kind of fun trying to do it backwards like that. But we had to create all of that and define what these creatures were, because in the end all the creatures are really supposed to be demons or manifestations of your own guilt and your own inner turmoil.
As attested to by concept art, while many of the designs were solidified early on, some aspects changed. For example, the Schism was originally known as the Gash at some point during development. Likewise, some enemies such as Gluttony were concepted but never made it past the art phase. Of the many creatures lurking in Homecoming, the spindly, doll-like Scarlet has become a fan favorite. I was able to sit down with animator Douglas Pikitko to get a better idea of how such a creature is made and then implemented in a game.
The Blood Boss went through so many iterations. There was an animator that started on it before I did, and then he left to work on another project, and I was pulled onto it. And the direction that he initially started was quite a bit different than I had gone, and his was more of a ragdolly type of motion, and it might have worked just as well. But we decided to go more with the porcelain heavy type of motion on that one, because we wanted it less ragdolly and more like this thing, even though it was just a doll, could really, do damage, really hurt you if it caught you. And another thing that we did to try and work on the fear factor of the Blood Boss is put it in a very dark environment, and then we had to do a lot of moves that were just really fast or really awkward things that you wouldn't see. And so with the textures, the environment, it being hard to see, that would kind of startle the player, especially if you weren't expecting it. So like one of the things is we had this, the doll kind of hop, but this is like one of the climbing on the ceiling. And we did like a couple of versions of this. I don't know which one ended up in the game because it was so dark you really didn't get to see a lot of the stuff. This was her climbing up to the top of the roof. So this is one of her leg swings. Like I said, I don't remember if this was used in the game. There's a bunch of stuff we did, and I don't remember all the ones that were taken. Ed Marr was the designer I worked with on this. amazing job. I don't think the Blood Boss would be half of what she was without him. So this was the Blood Boss's level. You can kind of see it in wireframe here. So you can see like his fans, you have like these lights. It's actually a fairly small room. It's not huge, but I guess the cameras and everything made it look a lot larger. In this cinematic, this is, I guess, where you hit it. And there would normally be a camera view of this, so you're seeing the uncamera viewed. You pry off that back, and she's shaking. So this one actually does have the camera in. You can see like down here is the camera. You'll be looking through that, and you stage it obviously for what you want. So this is her drawing. I don't know. Alex doesn't seem that concerned, but you only animate what the camera is seeing. I to this day I love the fact that the Blood Boss was so well received, and since I animated that character, that a huge honor to be able to have animated that and had it been so well received, because you don't know, it's especially with things like that, you don't know exactly how the reaction's going to be. Someone could love it, someone could hate it, and you try your best trying to make something that surprises, but what shocks and surprises one may not do another one. What one person likes, another one may not. Horror is very subjective.
While Scarlet's boss fight remains one of the most memorable moments in Homecoming, it was also slated to have other elements, including a skirt for the character that would have been made of blood. All that remains of this idea now is this animatic. In game development, nothing is certain. Timelines shift and change, problems can cause holdups in asset production and engine work. Silent Hill's development would be plagued by cuts to the game's world and story throughout development. These changes wouldn't affect the core structure of the game and Alex's journey through it, but they would cause the game to lose much of its possible flavor, including cuts to areas, appearances of Pyramid Head, subplots, side characters, and more. Quote, I know the team was not necessarily getting the guidance they wanted from the Konami producer. I don't know the details, but it didn't seem like it was an idyllic process. So then at the end, maybe the next winter, February of 2008, we got new management. So then things like the Hell Descent didn't have Pyramid Head. A lot of the set-piece stuff was cut out. The pure structure of the game, like going from point A to point B, that was all the same, but the fancier details got cut, like Pyramid Head in the graveyard, stuff like that. The Hell Descent was originally Pyramid Head chasing you, and you were chasing Josh. The cemetery had a Pyramid Head component, so the plot that was there either got removed or changed, but it was still telling the story of Alex the way you see it in the game. That's not necessarily uncommon in game development. The fancier stuff gets cut because you don't have time, you gotta finish the game. So at that point, the focus was to try and polish it and get it done. Like, we have what we have, so let's button up the things that are loose and finish the game. End quote. Much of David Freed's work was also changed through development after he'd left the project.
I don't think any of them made it into the game is the problem. Because there's one for the monument pillar where you spell out Fitch using these tiles, these triangular tiles that create teeth that clamp down. No, doesn't ring a bell. Yeah, I think all of these were cut. I think literally everything I did was cut. I had an attic puzzle. It was sliding furniture. So as the player pushes the lounge chair to the bottom of the stairs where the chain is dangling, it will automatically lock into place. Alex will step up on the chair, but he can't quite reach the chain. He has to go back and forth into the nightmare world. Basically, at that point, there was a way to control the way to transfer back and forth. But basically, there was this way to transfer back and forth between. For some of these puzzles, there would have been a way to transfer back and forth between normal world and nightmare world, and that would have allowed you to complete certain puzzles that you couldn't complete in one of them.
The other thing that was looked at very negatively was the story. And I don't blame them for looking at the story negatively, because I'd say a good half of it was cut. Because we ran out of time, we didn't actually get to do this in the whole story that we wanted to, and we had to cut a lot of things in order to get shipped the project. And in doing so, all writers and designers had to just kind of make what we had work. And they did an excellent job of, piecing together what we had, but, the initial story that I think would have been more Silent Hill pleasing to fans wasn't there, because it was, a lot of the cut, including a lot of the monsters and creatures.
Some aspects of the story that were cut included a sawmill area, which presumably would have had a fifth boss enemy at the end. Along with the sawmill would have been the Wheeler family tied to the origins of the town and the pact that had gone awry. Assets never went into production, and all that remains are concepts.
So there was a fifth family at one point. There was a fifth family, there was a fifth location, and that was the Wheeler family. And the Wheeler family was the fifth family in Shepherd's Glen. There was a whole world there was a sawmill world that you went to, and that was eventually cut due to time or budget or something.
We had this sawmill level. We only had renderings of it in sort of previs form. Nothing had been ever rendered in gameplay, but it was the Wheelers family, and then it was Wheeler family, and then that became Deputy Wheeler in the game. So that was condensed of character. There was no deputy yet, or the sawmill was going to be the deputy's family that he had come from, or whatever. And then we lost that because it just became another level, and for whatever reason, it could have been a cost, a time, a million reasons to why things. As the interesting thing about working on the game was that we wrote a ton of characters and we wrote a ton of locations in the very, very early phase of this. And then when we go away, the writers go away for months and months and months, and they go off and design and work and code and all the things, and then come back and like, yeah, those 3 people, they're not in the game anymore. That location's gone or whatever. They rework stuff. So it's a constantly evolving sort of rotating door. So of ideas and things that get between ideas versus execution. So
yeah, we had a sawmill at one point. I think we had a more expansive version of Shepherd's Glen, and I think the sawmill was definitely part of that. And then we not shrank, but we just focused our efforts on just the immediate neighborhood, really, and each of the story really got focused once we understood it was all about the pact and these different people that had made the pact, and that was going to be the focus of the structure. So then we just started identifying where are each of these families going to be in the game, and that's where the game really started taking root. And we knew it was going to be this familial story. Always, it was always going to be about Alex and his relationship with his parents and his brother. That was very early ideas. And then the story of going to Silent Hill was definitely something we always wanted to do, but we knew it was going to feature first the adjacent city, which ended up being called Shepherd's Glen.
At some point, we ended up writing a lot of stuff for these journals, which were really cool. Elle's diary, and then Alex's diary, and then Deputy Wheeler's diary. And they were released like a couple weeks leading up to the thing. And there was stuff that Elle talks about in those journals that actually was stuff that might have been, at one point, was being developed to be in the game. There was a library. She has a friend at the library. She had a woman who worked at like a cafe, was giving her food because her mom had been disappearing and not filling the refrigerator. So we had these other characters that they were going to meet at some point in the game. They all got scrapped for the game, and we threw them all into those diaries. I believe there's a part where Walter Sullivan is we wrote a part where Walter was having like a therapy session or something with the doctor, we recorded it, and so I think it's somewhere in the disc. If you can figure out how to find it, it's there.
The inclusion of Alchemilla Hospital was greatly reduced in the final game. Based on early level layout maps, an entire level was planned for the hospital, which had been featured in the first 3 Silent Hill games. A video by the YouTube channel Midnight Otherworld also alludes to other cut content, including various dialogue trees that were cut, belonging to mysteriously unnamed characters, possibly the ones referencing Silent Hill 4's Walter Sullivan. Another apparently cut idea was to have some kind of scene depicting Pyramid Head sexually assaulting another monster, an idea directly referencing the character's first appearance in Silent Hill 2, where James witnesses him attacking a mannequin creature. Given that these documents were made early in production, it's likely this scene was cut fairly on, considering its lack of context in Alex's story beyond pure shock value. Ultimately, Alchemil Hospital would show up in the game, during the opening Otherworld sections, and then later in the game, where Alex can view the exterior of Alchemilla during his excursion to Silent Hill. Many other story elements were cut, or at the very least left on the cutting room floor. Backgrounds for characters like Judge Holloway are most crucially lacking. In the game, her villainous turn comes out of left field, but in game design and story documents, she has a detailed history as a vindictive lawyer and an outsider to Shepherd's Glen who sought power and so joined the cult. Likewise, Deputy Wheeler's role as a conspiracy theorist obsessed with stories about Shepherd's Glen and Silent Hill had been minimized, left to exist primarily in promotional in-world blog posts that were released leading up to Homecoming's release. Other issues presented themselves late in development, such as outsourced cutscenes not delivering to the standard double helix expected.
We were not happy with the cinematics either. Unfortunately, they came in way late, and the quality just wasn't there. And we ended up having to go back through and fix a lot of the jarring stuff. There was too much, we never could get to it all. Like one of the things that still bugs me today is if you watch the game, a lot of Alex's peripherals, like his flashlight and his chain, don't move, they're just stationary. And there's a few shots in cinematics that actually do have movement. So I went in there and I started to fix some of that stuff, but like I said, it was just too many, never got to it all. And then a lot of it was, I don't know, kind of unfinished. And they're just probably because they cut so much, they were probably trying to piece together a lot of those things, and there were probably reshoots that had to be done, and it just was too much for the time and budget.
Whatever the team's reason for these cuts, it's clear that the game's ambition when development started and progressed in its early stages was there. It wasn't for lack of trying or talent that the team couldn't bring it to life like they had envisioned. The team behind Homecoming were fans of Silent Hill. They had played the games, they admired the work that had come before them, and they did their best to create a game that respected those titles while putting their own unique spin on a familiar franchise. But the numerous cuts to story and gameplay would take their toll. Silent Hill Homecoming is a complete game with a complete story. It can't be called unfinished, but it's not as fleshed out as it was meant to be. The team had worked for years to craft a game that could live up to the legacy of Silent Hill. However, in the end, Homecoming would be judged and remembered primarily for things like including Pyramid Head and borrowing from the aesthetic of the film. Fans didn't know what happened behind the scenes. They had no idea the cuts that needed to be made to fit the development timeline, or how the interference of an early producer had cemented elements like Pyramid Head. But that didn't stop Homecoming from receiving a tepid reception from critics and fans. The game's story was criticized for similarities to Silent Hill 2, for Pyramid Head's inclusion and thin characterizations. The game's combat, while a modernization of the classic style, was criticized for issues with animations and difficulty, a likely side effect of the studio's inexperience with in-depth combat systems. While the art style was praised for its detail and the Otherworld sections, overall the game was seen as too dark, relying heavily on the flashlight to navigate its underlit world. But the developers knew the game's flaws even before release. Quote, Silent Hill fans, I feel, want a studio to do their own thing and make their own mark on it. It just has to fit the series. But then you end up with something where they try so hard to fit the series and it's like, no, we don't want nurses again. Why are they even here? And the Smog is the lying figure, but he spits at you. The more interesting things are, where could this have led if we didn't have Pyramid Head and you kind of wanted to tell a story about Alex? Where would that have gone? Now, at the end, Pyramid Head wasn't narratively explained, but he also wasn't justified in the gameplay, because he only showed up in the hotel and at the end. So why was he here? Why did that have to be Pyramid Head? It didn't make any sense. So that's the origin of the Boogeyman. We made the poems and tried to seed them throughout the game so it felt like you were finding it throughout. But we didn't have weird, scary things. We had too many answers for this plot we were telling. At that point, we could see what people were going to say, and we tried to mitigate that as much as possible. There were all sorts of other things going on. How bright should it be? How should the flashlight work? Should the flashlight have batteries that would go out and you'd be stuck in the dark? All sorts of weird things to deal with. How hard are the enemies? All sorts of things. And it was all like I could see it in slow motion as each month passed. It was like, well, people aren't going to like this thing, people aren't going to like this part. I just remember that anxiety. And then it came out and people were upset. End quote.
Like, you're constantly looking at forums during the course of the development at fans' reactions to early images, and that played a huge part. Like, even though during the time we were not interacting with the fans directly, we would see their reaction to certain images that we posted, like the game was still yet to be out, and people's reactions that would actually literally have things change. Like, you'd have entire textures or levels change because we're like, uh-oh, this is getting a bad reaction. Let's try and change it. One of the things that I remember was a huge impact on us was a lot of people were saying this doesn't look like it's that scary. Obviously, they hadn't played the game yet, but they didn't feel it was that scary. So there was a huge initiative to try and make the game more scary, make it more frightening.
The response, look, I mean, the response was tepid at best, but the people who liked it really got into the game and they understood what the goal of the game was. I think the unfortunate part of the game was that the gameplay, the combat system and all that stuff, I think given the time frame that they had to produce the game, they probably couldn't get a combat system that was comparable to what was already very popular. I mean, it was hard to play a game where you're running around in a hotel fighting a needler. You can't jump on a bed, when that was something that you could easily do in most of the games at this point. Silent Hill had been limited in its early iterations by what the technology allowed. So you kind of forgave the fact that it's a little weird. The character is constantly blocked by geography. But because this game had now a more 3D and third person perspective, there were some assumptions and expectations that you would have that the game should do things that you could see in other games, and it couldn't do that. So that was kind of a bummer. Whenever we find a fan, on Twitter, I'm always like excited. And people are always very nice about it. And then whenever, and Chris knows this, whenever we find a not a fan, I always still retweet the negative stuff because I feel like it's part of the territory. If you make stuff, you're just going to have to kind of deal with the good and the bad. And the reality is that in the sort of the legacy of the series of the game, 2 really kind of stands out as being like the kind of hallmark of the series, even to this day, even though I actually really love 3. So you're always going to get compared to 2. You're always going to get compared to the original team's films. Sequels are always very difficult things. So going into that, if you don't, we didn't have really anybody, yes, of course, Konami's overseeing it. So, but ultimately, it was really everything in there was created by the game studio, and Konami was very supportive of that. So you can't ask for much more to that when you're going into a beloved series. And it's gonna be good and there's gonna be bad about it, but it's okay. It's all good. The fact that people played it was very exciting.
As with any game, the developers were cognizant of the flaws in what they had made. They saw fan and critical reception to Silent Hill Homecoming's combat story and other issues such as brightness and glitches. But Silent Hill Homecoming, for all its flaws, was never going to be an easy undertaking. The first mainline Western-developed game in a venerated Japanese franchise, a reinvention of what came before while modernizing the style of an aging genre, a game that tried to take as many notes from the Silent Hill films as the games that preceded it. It was saddled with questionable choices like including Pyramid Head, and then the team was forced to cut much of his inclusion, along with other chunks of texture and world building. But for all its problems, the team had done their best with what they could, and Homecoming would prove to be a fondly remembered experience for many.
It was really exciting for me, like I said, because it was my first time doing something like that, doing cutscenes. I had never done cutscenes before, and then I fell in love with just cutting in a linear fashion. And no, don't get me wrong, I love doing in-game stuff, which I still do. But then I just had so much fun cutting to picture, and just having it play, the same each time. And it's because of that game is the reason why I went into film. Right now I'm working on a few DC movies, right now I'm working on Black Adam. As you can imagine, there's Black Adam magic. So like that, and a lot of times I'll go back and I'll think like things that I did on that show on Silent Hill, And even though it was my first project, I learned so much, and it stuck with me my entire career.
I just remember feeling excited about reinterpreting Silent Hill for ourselves and just this iconic town, just bringing it forward. That just felt great. But the moment that definitely I felt like we had something was definitely the hospital mission. Like that was an early proof of concept. Like how do we get this quality bar that we want to achieve, this atmosphere that we wanted to achieve? Because that, to me, Silent Hill is all about atmosphere. The thing that I enjoyed the most is, we had a very small team. The Collective was not a very big company. And then the Collective has always been a studio that has done a lot more with less. And we had our own proprietary tech. And the fact that we were able to transition from the previous generation to what I felt like was still, I look at it, the game now, pretty cutting edge looking visuals. I think it's a testament to the team's passion and to deliver one of the finest pieces of graphic interactive media at the time for the size team that we had. I felt like we were punching way above our weight class. So I really enjoyed seeing the town of Shepherd's Glen come together by the environment art team. I thought that really started to have personality and it felt real and believable and the scale felt really good. And seeing all those creatures come together was another, big high. And the character team was very tight. The animation team was stellar. We just really, I think we did a lot, and we had a very positive momentum, around some very clear goals, and that was to live up to the high bar that the Team Silent had laid.
I just love animating all those creatures. Like that's something that you don't get to do in a lot of games these days, especially nowadays. It's realistic stuff, very realistic stuff, a lot of hyper real bipedal characters, and these were creatures that were imaginative and stuff that just normally wouldn't go together. You have to try and figure out a way to make them move. And so as an animator, that's really fun and exciting to do, is animate crazy things like that. So that's probably one of my favorite memories, is just that and then also just seeing fans' reactions to, like, even though maybe the game wasn't as well received as some of the other ones, they still have fun seeing the creatures and whatnot. And
I played all the way through it, and then I played it with some friends. It was like first time to play like this really cool game that I worked on. I thought it was super cool. I was actually bummed that we didn't make another one.
I really enjoyed the collaboration. I know that there's times when we all disagreed on what it was going to be, but we would talk through all sorts of like crazy ideas, and then you come in the next week and there'd be a drawing of it on the wall, and that was like a really, really cool thing to get to see that stuff come to life. But I think the coolest part of the entire process was just playing the game at the end. And even though some things did get changed, and there was, even from the time we finished working, there were changes that were made after that you play the game and say, oh, when do they change that? But when you make something you write something for film or television, and you get to watch it, and that's a really, really cool process. This was getting to not just watch, but also interact with something that you had written. And over the course of a long period of time, because I'm terrible at these games, so it would take me, I don't know how long it took me, a week or two to play the game. And each time you get through something, you discover something, and then you get to see a scene that you wrote. And then a day later, you get to go do something and see a puzzle that you wrote. And the extensive amount of stuff that we got to write and the whole world that we got to build, I think that was some of the really, really cool stuff that you don't normally get to do when you're working in TV or film.
I think for the last game that I developed for the Collective, which I was there for nearly 7 years, I was really proud of what the team was able to accomplish. The game itself and how it ended up, I do wish it had a higher degree of polish. I wish we had worked out some of the storytelling. I think the story itself had a lot of promise. I think it was a little clumsy in how we executed it. But at the time, we weren't experts at telling these really deep stories. All I could say is, even though it has its flaws. I still have it as it's just one of those things. I'm just so proud to say I worked on a Silent Hill game because I was such a big fan of that franchise. And it was also just a career highlight to work with Akira and, having dinners with him. And even though we worked through translators, there was a lot of mutual respect, and hearing his original music come into the game just, to me, put a stamp of authenticity on it. So yeah, I mean, all I could say about Silent Hill Homecoming is at the time, it was the most important game I'd ever worked on. And I felt really proud.
For me, the greatest memory of working on Silent Hill Homecoming was the fact that it's not often that you get to do something in the entertainment business that is like close to your heart as far as something you have a real passion about. I had for years had a huge passion about Silent Hill as a game, and then would never, when I played it in 1999, when I played the one I bought out of a trunk of a guy's car at the Dayland Mall, that I thought a couple years later that I would be working on writing the game, another version of the game. So I think just being able to play in the Silent Hill sandbox for 2-something years, and then, I mean, it's great when a game comes out and you get to go to a store and see it on the shelf and play it at home, and all the things that you worked on for 2 years you get to see, because there wasn't like we really got to see anything. We would see little bits of development, but we never played the game before it went out. So getting to play the full several hours of gameplay and seeing the game, that was pretty exciting. And most of the stuff we have in there was stuff that we had written. It really, I mean, Brian and John, we loved working with them. They had to make the changes they make, but it wasn't because they didn't like what we were doing. They just like, these are changes to make. But it was a great experience, and everybody there was a lot of fun, and it was a very cool time, and it was just fun getting to be a part of something that I had previously loved. That was probably the best part.
Silent Hill Homecoming has long been the black sheep of the series, and where many believe the series started to go awry, which would eventually lead to a nearly decade-long hiatus. However, now, with renewed interest in the franchise from publisher Konami, I think Homecoming deserves to be remembered in a different light. As more developers are inspired by classic Silent Hill games, Homecoming stands as one of the first to try and capture the essence of the series while doing something different. Footsteps that other games are soon to follow in. In the end, even if Homecoming wasn't entirely successful in what it tried, it deserves to be remembered in the inheritance of Silent Hill, if for no other reason than the passion and creativity that brought it into being. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for watching. This video has been a labor of love and has also been a long time coming. If you followed me and my channel for a long time, you know I've been working on it for months and months and months, and it wouldn't have been at all possible without my wonderful patrons and of course the help from all of the designers, editors, writers, and everybody else who worked on Silent Hill Homecoming, who agreed to sit down and chat with me and be open about their experiences working on the game. As I mentioned, this has been a very long and arduous process, especially trying to get it out before Halloween and amid new Silent Hill releases, or pending releases. I am a bit exhausted, honestly, to say the least, of making these documentaries. I love doing them. I love uncovering the stories behind games and sitting down and talking to the people who made them and bringing those stories to my audience. But between last year's Fear 3 and this year's Paradise Killer and then this one, I don't know if my audience currently has the retention or span, really, to continue justifying the amount of time and effort it takes to make these. So that in mind, I'm probably going to be taking a bit of a break from long-form video essays and documentaries for a little bit, in the hopes that the channel gets to pick up. I do have other ones that I would like to and have already started pursuing, such as DMC Devil May Cry and Raven Software's Wolfenstein, but who knows if those will ever see completion. I have a lot of other irons in the fire. If you know me, if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I do a lot of different things. I do music, I do stand-up comedy, so taking a lot of time out of my schedule to work on these things, while I do love them, and I love, again, making these things and bringing these stories to you, it's a lot of effort. And if you would like to help me continue making other videos, even if they aren't necessarily super long or feature length, please head over to my Patreon or feel free to donate to my Ko-Fi. I will put links down below in the video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.